Understood. Here's the text exactly as it is with 0 modifications. My mother's brother, my uncle Elias, was always the shining star of our family. After my father's sudden death when my mom and I were falling apart, he swooped in like a hero. My dad's small carpentry business was going under, and Elias, with a hefty inheritance, paid off all my mom's debts, bought us a new house, and started arranging luxurious annual cruises to strengthen family bonds. At first, I saw him as a savior too, but long before those cruises began, alarm bells had started ringing in my head. It was during last summer's Alaska trip, a few weeks before my 16th birthday, that I first felt something was terribly wrong. Elias played the role of the kind, generous uncle who had charmed my mom flawlessly. My mom believed his every word, approved of his every move. But I saw a predatory glint in his eyes, especially when he looked at me. His hands would linger on my shoulders during those revoltingly long hugs, or he'd suddenly appear wherever I was, even on the same deck. It was like he was a shadow, tracking me. When I tried telling my mom, she'd explode with vicious defensiveness, screaming about how ungrateful I was to the man who saved us from living in our car. This year's Mediterranean cruise felt like the final straw. On the first day, Elias announced he was installing a family safety, the app, on all our phones. With potential internet outages at sea, it's important we can find each other in an emergency, he said. But his eyes locked onto mine, that predatory intensity chilling me to the bone. My mom just sat there, agreeing with him like a zombie, completely checked out from reality ever since Elias had slithered into our lives 6 months ago. She'd been like that since Dad died. He handed my phone over with those dead shark eyes gleaming and started demonstrating how he could watch my every movement in real time. Then he dropped the bomb that shattered what was left of my world. He'd been tracking my after-school activities and wanted to know exactly what I was really doing there. Mom perched beside him, nodding like a brainwashed cult member, while he explained how this was just good parenting. When I tried to fight back, Elias's voice went deadly quiet, and he reminded me that he owns my phone, my car, and my entire existence now. Mom immediately started shrieking about how lucky I was to have someone who cared so much, and that I needed to stop being such a spoiled brat. That night, I stared at my phone, knowing this psychopath could monitor my every breath. The next morning, I jolted awake to find Elias standing in my doorway, fully dressed like he'd been stationed there for hours just watching me sleep. He claimed he wanted to check on me since I seemed upset, but the way his eyes crawled over my body made me want to vomit. When I demanded he leave, he actually stepped further into my room and planted himself on my bed, running his fingers through my hair while whispering about how beautiful I looked when I was vulnerable. I recoiled like he'd burned me and whispered, "Get out!" But he just chuckled and said I was being hysterical. Later at school, I desperately tried explaining the situation to one of my teachers. But how do you convince someone that your uncle is a predator when he hasn't technically crossed any legal lines yet? She listened and scribbled notes, but ultimately delivered the crushing blow that without concrete evidence, there was nothing anyone could do. She suggested family therapy, which was laughable since Mom thought Elias walked on water. When I walked through our front door that afternoon, Elias was waiting like a spider in his web. He interrogated me about why I'd lingered an extra 20 minutes after classes, demanding to know if I was spreading lies about our family to school officials. I stammered some excuse about using the bathroom, but he kept drilling deeper, Divis, asking specifically about counselors and teachers like he could read my mind. Mom materialized during this interrogation, and instead of protecting me, she started attacking me for potentially embarrassing our family at school. That's when the last shred of hope in my chest died, as I realized I was completely alone with these two monsters. Elias's face lit up with pure satisfaction at Mom's betrayal, and he suggested maybe I needed constant supervision since I clearly couldn't be trusted with any freedom. Mom agreed instantly, gushing about how teenagers today are too spoiled and need firmer boundaries. I watched my own mother choose this predator over her daughter and felt something inside me break forever. That night, Elias invaded my room again, this time sitting on my bed for an eternity while his hand rested on my thigh. When I told him he was violating my boundaries, he said I was being dramatic, that physical closeness was healthy in real families. He stayed there talking about how ungrateful nieces sometimes need special attention to learn proper behavior. The next morning, I caught him rifling through my dresser drawers. He spun some obvious lie about putting away laundry, but I could see he'd been searching through my most private belongings, looking for God knows what. Right when I confronted him, his mask finally slipped, and he erupted with terrifying rage, telling me I was paranoid and disrespectful. Mom came running in, but instead of questioning why this man was violating my privacy, she screamed at me for being hostile to our family savior. She said, if I couldn't learn gratitude, maybe I should find somewhere else to live when I turn 18. Elias wrapped his arm around her shoulders like he owned her and suggested they start researching private academies for troubled youth to fix my attitude problem. I lay in bed that night, scrolling through private academy websites on my phone, my stomach turning as I read the admission requirements. Every single one demanded detailed financial information from parents, bank statements, tax returns, proof of income. The realization hit me like ice water. Elias wasn't just trying to get rid of me. He was making sure I'd disappear completely from anyone who might help. My fingers trembled as I clicked through page after page of these prison-like facilities masquerading as schools. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, hoping to grab breakfast and escape before Elias started his daily performance. But when I crept into the kitchen, he was already there, leaning against the counter like he'd been waiting. His eyes immediately zeroed in on my phone, clutched in my hand. He moved toward me with that predatory grace that made my skin crawl. His hand shot out, palm up, demanding my phone to check my internet history. I clutched it tighter against my chest and took a step back. That's when something shifted in his face, the mask he wore for Mom completely vanishing. His voice dropped to this cold, threatening tone I'd never heard before, each word precise and sharp like a blade. The kitchen suddenly felt too small as he advanced on me, backing me into the corner by the refrigerator. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pressed myself against the cold metal, still refusing to hand over my phone. His jaw clenched and unclenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. That's when Mom walked in, still in her bathrobe. She took one look at the scene. Me cornered, Elias looming over me, and immediately started shrieking at me. She demanded I hand over my phone right now, grounding me from all technology except what I needed for school. Elias's lips curled into the satisfied smirk as Mom did his dirty work for him. I had no choice but to surrender my phone, watching helplessly as Elias's fingers flew across the screen, checking everything. Mom stood beside him, nodding approvingly, completely oblivious to how she just helped him tighten his control over me. At school during lunch, I borrowed a friend's phone to check my messages. My best friend, Chloe, had texted me dozens of times over the past few days, growing increasingly worried about my silence. The latest messages were frantic, asking if I was okay, why I wasn't responding. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through our conversation history and realized Elias had been monitoring everything, blocking me from responding to certain messages. I handed the phone back, my mind racing. He wasn't just watching, he was actively controlling my communications, deciding who I could and couldn't talk to. The isolation was deliberate, systematic. That afternoon in study hall, I made a desperate decision. I tore pages from the back of my chemistry textbook, the ripping sound making me flinch, even though the library was nearly empty. Using a borrowed pen, I started documenting everything. Dates, times, specific incidents. My handwriting was shaky, but I forced myself to be thorough, creating evidence that Elias couldn't delete or monitor. I folded the pages carefully and tucked them into my school locker behind my gym clothes. It wasn't much, but it was something he couldn't access, couldn't control. My own private record of the nightmare I was living. When I got home that afternoon, I immediately sensed something was wrong. My bedroom door was slightly ajar, even though I always closed it completely. I pushed it open slowly, my heart sinking at what I saw. My dresser drawers were all perfectly aligned, too perfectly. Elias had been in here again, but this time he'd reorganized everything with military precision. My diary was gone. I tore through my room searching for it, checking under my mattress, in my closet, behind my desk. Nothing. The leather-bound journal where I'd been documenting Elias's behavior for weeks had vanished like it never existed. I found Elias in the living room, calmly reading a newspaper, like he hadn't just violated my privacy again. When I confronted him about my missing diary, he looked up with those dead eyes and claimed he'd never seen any diary. But he watched my face too carefully, studying my reaction like he was cataloging exactly what I might have written about him. He sat down the newspaper and leaned forward, asking specific questions about what kinds of complaints I'd been making, who I'd been talking to about our family situation. Each question was a precise probing designed to figure out how much evidence I'd gathered and who might know about it. Over the next few days, Elias's campaign to isolate me intensified. He started calling my friends' parents, introducing himself as my concerned uncle. He'd spin stories about my behavioral changes, suggesting I was going through a difficult phase and might be a bad influence. His voice would drip with false concern as he recommended limiting contact with me for their children's well-being. Chloe pulled me aside after PE class, her face twisted with confusion and hurt. Her parents had received one of Elias's calls and now wouldn't let her hang out with me anymore. Elias had painted me as unstable, possibly even dangerous. The worst part was how believable he'd made it sound. A caring uncle worried about his troubled niece. One by one, my friends started pulling away. Their parents had all received similar calls, all heard the same poisonous narrative about my deteriorating mental state. Elias was systematically destroying my support network, cutting me off from anyone who might help or believe me. That night, Elias made another of his bedroom visits. This time, I was ready. I'd hidden my phone under my pillow with a voice memo app already open. As soon as I heard his footsteps in the hallway, I pressed record. He sat on my bed again, his weight making the mattress dip. His hand found my shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to hurt. He started talking in that low, threatening tone about how disappointed he was in my behavior, how ungrateful I was being. The recording captured everything, his true voice, the menace beneath a concerned uncle act. But my small victory was short-lived. The next morning, Elias confiscated my phone completely, claiming I'd violated the family technology rules. The voice recording was trapped on a device I no longer had access to. Later that week, I overheard Elias on a phone call that made my blood freeze. He was discussing residential programs for troubled teens, asking about intake procedures and how quickly they could accommodate a new student. The person on the other end was apparently walking him through different options: therapeutic academies, wilderness programs, residential treatment centers. I pressed myself against the wall outside his office, straining to hear every word. Elias was taking notes, asking about programs specifically designed for defiant teenagers with behavioral issues. And he wanted to know about visitation policies, communication restrictions, how long the programs typically lasted. The private academy threat wasn't just intimidation anymore. He was actively making plans to ship me away to one of these teen prison camps where I'd have no voice, no way to reach out for help. My grades started slipping as the stress consumed me. I couldn't concentrate in class, couldn't focus on homework when I knew Elias was planning my disappearance. Every failed quiz, every missing assignment just gave him more ammunition for his narrative about my deteriorating mental state. Mrs. Albright, my English teacher, noticed the change immediately. She kept me after class one day, her kind eyes full of concern. She asked gentle questions about what was happening at home, why my performance had declined so dramatically. I wanted desperately to tell her everything, but fear kept my mouth shut. What if she called Elias? What if her concern just made things worse? I mumbled something about stress and family issues, unable to meet her eyes. She didn't push, but I could see the worry etched on her face as I gathered my things and fled her classroom. During lunch detention the next day, I found myself alone with Mr. Miller, my biology teacher. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was his quiet, non-judgmental presence, but I took a calculated risk. I started talking carefully at first, testing the waters. Mr. Miller listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. He asked about specific incidents, whether I felt safe at home, if there had been any physical violence. When I explained about the bedroom visits, the missing diary, the systematic isolation, his expression grew increasingly grave. But then came the crushing blow. Mr. Miller explained gently but firmly that without concrete evidence of abuse or immediate danger, there were severe limitations on what teachers could do. The inappropriate bedroom visits were concerning, but not technically illegal. The controlling behavior was troubling, but fell into a gray area. Without bruises, without explicit threats, without something provable, the system couldn't intervene. He suggested documenting everything, keeping records, finding trusted adults who could support me. But I could see in his eyes the same helplessness I felt. The system wasn't designed to protect kids from predators who were smart enough to stay just within legal boundaries. I left that meeting understanding a harsh truth. Even sympathetic adults needed proof I didn't have. Elias had been too careful, too calculated. Every violation had been crafted to maximum psychological damage while staying just shy of anything actionable. A few days later, my Aunt Clara, Mom's sister, called the house unexpectedly. I happened to be closest to the phone and grabbed it before Elias could intercept. Clara's warm voice filled my ear, asking how everyone was doing, if we needed anything. I glanced around frantically, seeing Elias in the kitchen. I had seconds at most. I whispered urgently that something was wrong, that I needed help. But before I could say more, Elias's hand clamped down on my shoulder. He pried the phone from my grip, his fingers digging into my skin hard enough to bruise, but his voice was perfectly pleasant as he greeted Clara, explaining that I'd been having some behavioral issues lately and was being dramatic. He controlled the entire conversation, steering it away from anything substantive while maintaining his perfect uncle facade. But Clara wasn't stupid. Something in Elias's overly controlling responses, the way he wouldn't let her talk to me again, triggered her suspicions. Before hanging up, she mentioned she'd be in town tomorrow and would love to stop by for a visit. Elias's mask slipped for just a moment, panic flashing across his face before he recovered. He agreed to the visit with false enthusiasm, but I could see his mind already working, planning how to manage this unexpected threat to his control. That evening was a frenzy of preparation. Elias coached Mom extensively on what to say, how to act, what topics to avoid. He made her rehearse responses about my behavior, my supposed mental health issues, the loving family environment they'd created. Mom parroted everything back perfectly, her dead eyes never questioning why they needed such elaborate preparation for a simple family visit. Elias turned his attention to me next, laying out exactly what I was and wasn't allowed to discuss with Clara. Any deviation, any attempt to signal for help, and he'd accelerate my placement in a residential facility. The threat was explicit now: cooperate or disappear. When Clara arrived the next afternoon, the house felt like a stage set for a performance. Elias played the concerned uncle perfectly. Mom robotically supported every word, and I sat frozen with fear, unable to break through the elaborate charade. Clara's sharp eyes took in everything. The way I flinched when Elias touched my shoulder. Mom's overly bright smile that never reached her eyes. The suffocating tension that permeated every interaction. She asked careful questions, probing gently, but Elias deflected masterfully. By the time Clara left, I could see the frustration in her face. She knew something was wrong, but Elias's performance had been too polished, too convincing. He'd successfully painted me as a troubled teenager going through a difficult phase. Nothing more sinister than typical adolescent rebellion. As her car pulled away, my last hope seemed to disappear with it. Elias's satisfied smirk told me he knew it too. He'd won this round, proved that his control extended even to family visits. The private academy research would continue, and now he could claim even Clara agreed I was just being a dramatic teenager. Elias's triumphant expression after Clara's departure made my stomach turn. He immediately began leveraging her visit as proof that I was trying to turn family against each other. Mom nodded along as he explained how my attempts to manipulate Clara showed I needed immediate professional help. His voice carried that false concern he'd perfected. But underneath, I could hear the satisfaction of another victory. I recognized the tactics from articles I'd read online about psychological abuse, isolation, gaslighting, turning potential allies against the victim. Elias was following the playbook perfectly, and I was trapped in his carefully constructed narrative. The following week, the school nurse called me to her office. She'd noticed my weight loss and the dark circles under my eyes during a routine health screening. Her gentle questions about my eating habits and sleep patterns made me realize how visible the stress had become. She documented everything in her files, becoming the first adult to create an official record of the physical toll Elias's psychological warfare was taking on me. When the nurse called home to discuss her concerns, Elias immediately scheduled a doctor's appointment. He framed it as addressing my apparent eating disorder and depression, weaponizing my body's stress responses as further evidence of my supposed mental instability. Mom sat in the waiting room while Elias accompanied me into the examination room, his presence ensuring I couldn't speak freely. During the appointment, the doctor asked for a few minutes alone with me for routine adolescent health questions. My heart raced with the possibility of finally telling someone, but when the moment came, fear paralyzed me. Elias's threats echoed in my mind, and without physical evidence of abuse, I knew how it would sound. I denied any problems at home, missing what might have been my only chance for medical intervention. Walking out of that office, I felt the weight of my cowardice. I'd let fear win again, and Elias's satisfied expression showed he knew it. But something shifted in me that day, a determination that next time I'd be braver. That resolve was tested sooner than expected. Elias's ex-wife, Brenda, called the house looking for him about their shared daughter. I answered the phone while Elias was outside, and something in Brenda's careful tone made me listen closely. She mentioned needing to discuss custody arrangements, specifically about their daughter continuing to live with her full-time for her own protection. The way Brenda emphasized those last 3 words sent chills down my spine. This was someone who understood Elias's true nature. I managed to keep her talking for a few precious minutes, learning that their daughter had been living exclusively with Brenda for over 2 years. Brenda's voice carried a weight of experience, a knowing that made me feel less alone. Before Elias returned, Brenda whispered urgently for me to be careful and document everything. The line went dead just as Elias walked through the door, but not before I'd heard the validation I desperately needed. Someone else knew what he was capable of. Elias's paranoia after Brenda's call was palpable. He interrogated me about every word exchanged, his questions revealing how threatened he felt by any outside contact. His mask slipped repeatedly as he demanded to know if Brenda had said anything about him, about their past, about why their daughter lived with her. I played dumb, but inside I was cataloging his fear. Elias's control had weak points. A few days later, I discovered my backpack had been searched. The letter I'd written to Clara explaining everything was gone. Elias had been systematically going through my belongings, looking for any evidence of my attempts to reach out. The violation felt complete. Even my school bag wasn't safe from his surveillance. Elias used the discovered letter as leverage, offering me a deal. If I stopped causing problems and accepted the help he and Mom were offering, he'd consider letting me stay home instead of sending me to the academy. But I recognized the manipulation. This wasn't mercy. It was another control tactic. Mom pressured me to accept Elias's generous offer, revealing the depth of her complicity. She knew exactly what was happening, but had chosen Elias's financial security over my safety. Her words cut deeper than any of Elias's threats because they came from someone who was supposed to protect me. Through careful observation, I noticed patterns in Elias's schedule. He claimed to have client meetings several evenings a week, but for someone in his supposed day job as a real estate investor, the timing didn't add up. These inconsistencies suggested Elias might be hiding more than just his predatory behavior. I realized Elias's hold over Mom went beyond money. She seemed genuinely terrified of being alone again, of returning to the financial desperation we'd faced after Dad's death. Elias had positioned himself as her savior, and she clung to that narrative even as it destroyed her daughter. My research into abuse survival stories online gave me new strategies. I stopped engaging in family dinners where Elias could corner me, instead grabbing food and retreating to my room. This small act of defiance felt monumental. I was learning to protect myself within the constraints of my situation. Mrs. Albright noticed my increased confidence and offered to let me eat lunch in her classroom. This daily reprieve became my sanctuary, a place where Elias's reach couldn't extend. We developed subtle signals. If I needed help, I'd leave a specific book on her desk. It wasn't much, but it was something. During a family discussion about my behavior, I employed a new tactic. Instead of defending myself or getting emotional, I calmly asked Elias specific questions about his concerns. Why exactly did he think I needed residential treatment? What specific behaviors warranted such extreme measures? His inability to provide concrete answers without revealing his true motivations left him visibly flustered for the first time. One evening, while Elias showered, I noticed he'd left his work laptop open on the kitchen table. My hands shook as I quickly navigated to his browser history, finding extensive research on controlling teenage behavior, therapeutic private academies, and legal guardianship rights. I managed to screenshot several pages onto a flash drive I'd hidden in my backpack before the water shut off. Mom began showing cracks in her blind support when Elias suggested immediate placement at a facility he'd found. Something about the urgency made her hesitate, questioning why they couldn't try local therapy first. Elias's irritation at her resistance revealed how accustomed he'd become to her complete compliance. Clara called again, and this time I managed a longer conversation while Elias was occupied. I carefully planted seeds of doubt about Elias's narrative, mentioning how isolated I'd become and how my friends' parents had all received similar calls about my supposed instability. Clara's questions grew more pointed, her concern more evident. When Clara offered to have me visit for a weekend, Elias faced a dilemma. Refusing would look controlling, but agreeing meant temporarily losing his grip on me. He chose to allow it, but spent hours coaching me on acceptable topics of conversation, his desperation to maintain his image becoming increasingly apparent. The weekend at Clara's house felt like breathing fresh air after months of suffocation. She noticed how I relaxed away from home, how my appetite returned, how I smiled more freely. The contrast to my behavior at home validated what I'd been trying to tell people. The problem wasn't me. Elias's text messages during the visit grew increasingly demanding. He wanted constant updates on our activities, became angry when I didn't respond immediately, and sent multiple messages about missing me that felt more like surveillance than affection. Clara witnessed these exchanges firsthand, her expression growing more concerned with each notification. In a private moment, Clara mentioned that Elias's behavior reminded her of Mom's ex-boyfriend from years ago, someone who'd seemed perfect at first, but gradually revealed controlling tendencies. This family history of recognizing abuse patterns gave me hope that Clara might be the ally I desperately needed. Returning home after the weekend felt like walking back into a cage, but Clara's validation had strengthened something inside me. I moved differently, spoke with more confidence, and Elias noticed. His attempts to reassert control became more desperate, more obvious. Clara began calling more frequently and making unexpected visits. As an adult, with her own resources, she couldn't be manipulated like my teenage friends. Elias's frustration with this development was evident in his increasingly agitated behavior. Whenever she was mentioned, Mom started questioning their approach to handling my supposed problems. Clara's presence had disrupted the echo chamber Elias had created, introducing doubt into Mom's certainty about my need for institutional help. Her independent thinking, however small, represented the first crack in Elias's complete control over her. My improved mental state from having Clara's support led to better performance at school. Teachers noticed my renewed focus, undermining Elias's narrative about my deteriorating condition. Every good grade, every positive interaction chipped away at the case he'd been building. During another of Elias's shower times, I managed to copy his browser history onto my flash drive, creating a backup of the evidence I'd found. My hands moved quickly, efficiently, powered by the knowledge that I was building a case of my own. Elias announced he'd found the perfect therapeutic private academy that had an opening in 2 weeks. The facility specialized in troubled teens with behavioral issues, and he'd already begun the application process. The countdown to my potential disappearance had officially begun. Clara demanded to tour the facility before any decisions were made. Elias couldn't refuse without seeming unreasonable, so he reluctantly agreed to include her in the process. This forced involvement of an outside adult clearly frustrated his plans. The academy visit was a revelation. What Elias had described as a therapeutic environment was actually a lockdown facility with barred windows, monitored phone calls, and strict isolation protocols. Clara's horror was visible as we toured the grounds, while I maintained a calm composure that contrasted sharply with Elias's description of my supposed instability. In the car afterward, Clara confronted Mom about sending me to what amounted to a juvenile detention center. Mom struggled to articulate why I needed such extreme intervention, her rehearsed responses crumbling under Clara's direct questions. The disconnect between Elias's narrative and reality was becoming impossible to ignore. Mom's inability to justify the private academy placement marked a turning point. For the first time, she questioned Elias's assessment of my mental state. The doubt was small, but it was there, flickering in her eyes as she looked between Elias and Clara. Clara's threat to seek legal guardianship if I was sent to the facility created the first real external challenge to Elias's authority. The possibility of legal intervention, of outside oversight, struck at the foundation of his carefully constructed control system. Elias responded by trying to accelerate my placement, moving up the timeline to prevent Clara from taking legal action. His desperation was showing, the careful facade cracking under pressure from someone he couldn't manipulate or intimidate. I realized this was my last chance. The evidence I'd collected, the documentation I'd hidden, the recordings trapped on my confiscated phone, it was time to take the ultimate risk. I gathered everything I could access and prepared to show Clara the full scope of what I'd been enduring. The moment of truth came during Clara's next visit. While Mom and Elias were in the kitchen, I handed her my flash drive and the pages I'd hidden in my school locker. Her expression as she reviewed the evidence shifted from concern to horror to fierce determination. Clara's face went pale as she scrolled through the screenshots on my flash drive. Her hands trembled slightly as she read my handwritten documentation from school, each page detailing Elias's escalating behavior. I watched her expression harden with each piece of evidence, transforming from shock into protective fury. She immediately confronted Mom with everything, spreading the papers across the kitchen table while Elias stood frozen in the doorway. Mom's initial defensive posture crumbled as Clara methodically presented each documented incident. The bedroom invasions, the diary theft, the systematic isolation of my support network, the browser history screenshots showing Elias's research into academies designed for troubled teens. Mom's face drained of color. Elias attempted to dismiss the evidence as teenage dramatics, but Clara cut him off with a raised hand. She pulled out her phone and began making calls, first to a family lawyer she knew, then to other relatives who needed to know what was happening. Elias's carefully maintained facade shattered as he realized his control was slipping away. Mom sat at the table staring at the evidence with growing horror. Clara forced her to look at specific incidents. Timestamps showing Elias entering my room at night, documentation of friends whose parents had received his poisonous phone calls. Each piece of proof chipped away at the narrative Mom had desperately clung to about Elias being our family's savior. Clara announced she was calling Child Protective Services and would seek emergency custody if necessary. The threat of official intervention sent Elias into damage control mode. He tried bargaining, claiming the academy idea was just to help me, that he'd cancel everything if we could handle this as a family. His desperation was palpable as he watched his carefully constructed world unravel. I stood in the corner, watching everything unfold with a strange mixture of relief and terror. Clara noticed my trembling and positioned herself between Elias and me, a physical barrier that felt more protective than anything I'd experienced in months. She made it clear that I wouldn't be staying in this house another night. Elias's final manipulation attempt involved threatening to leave and withdraw all financial support. He reminded Mom about the mortgage payments, the car loans, the credit cards, all the financial chains he'd wrapped around our family. Mom visibly wavered, the fear of returning to poverty, warring with the undeniable evidence of what Elias had been doing to me. Clara immediately countered by offering temporary financial help if Mom chose to protect me. She laid out the choice starkly. Mom could keep her predator boyfriend and lose her daughter forever, or she could choose her child's safety over financial security. The kitchen felt suffocating as we waited for Mom's decision. Mom's hesitation stretched painfully long. I could see her calculating, weighing her options, and something inside me shattered at the realization that this wasn't an automatic choice for her. Clara's expression grew increasingly disgusted as the silence lengthened. I made the decision for everyone by walking to my room and beginning to pack. My hands moved mechanically, folding clothes and gathering essentials, while tears blurred my vision. I could hear raised voices from the kitchen, but focused only on filling my backpack with everything I could carry. Clara appeared in my doorway, her face set with determination. She helped me pack, assuring me that I had a safe place with her for as long as I needed. We worked in efficient silence, both understanding that my childhood in this house was ending. Elias tried blocking our path to the door, but Clara simply pulled out her phone and began dialing 911. He stepped aside, his face contorting with rage as he realized he'd lost. Mom stood frozen in the hallway, watching her daughter prepare to leave, rather than live with a predator she'd chosen over family. The car ride to Clara's house passed in a blur. I clutched my backpack and stared out the window, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Clara kept glancing at me with concern, but didn't push for conversation, understanding I needed time to absorb the reality of my escape. At Clara's house, she showed me to the guest room that would become my sanctuary. The space felt safe in a way my own bedroom hadn't in months. Clara helped me unpack, treating me with a gentleness that made me realize how much I'd been living in survival mode. Over the following days, Clara coordinated with lawyers and social services. She filed for temporary guardianship, documenting everything with the evidence I'd collected. Elias tried various tactics to regain control, threatening legal action, attempting to contact me directly, even showing up at Clara's house until she got a restraining order. Mom's calls started tentatively, full of accusations about me destroying our family. But as Elias's true nature became impossible to ignore without me there as his target, her tone shifted. She began therapy at Clara's insistence, slowly unpacking how she'd enabled my abuse for financial security. I started my own therapy sessions, finally able to speak freely about everything without fear of Elias's retaliation. The therapist helped me understand that none of it was my fault, that Elias had systematically groomed not just me, but Mom too, creating a dynamic where his control seemed normal. School became my refuge as I rebuilt my life from Clara's house. Mrs. Albright and Mr. Miller offered quiet support, understanding without needing details why I'd suddenly moved. My grades slowly improved as the constant stress lifted, proving Elias's narrative about my deteriorating mental state had always been a lie. Elias's attempts to maintain contact grew increasingly desperate. He sent letters full of manipulation tactics, alternating between threats, false apologies, and promises to change. Clara helped me file proper documentation with the police, building a paper trail in case we needed a permanent restraining order. 3 months into living with Clara, Mom reached out differently. She'd been attending therapy consistently and wanted to meet in a neutral location with her therapist present. Clara left the choice to me, making it clear I had no obligation to rebuild a relationship with someone who'd chosen a predator over my safety. The meeting was painful, but necessary. Mom's therapist guided the conversation as Mom acknowledged her failures, her choice of financial security over my well-being, her willful blindness to Elias's predatory behavior. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Her therapist had apparently worked with her on understanding that wasn't hers to demand. I listened without committing to anything, still processing my own trauma in therapy. The woman across from me seemed different from the mom who'd screamed at me for embarrassing our family, but I couldn't trust that change yet. Trust would take time, if it came at all. Elias eventually moved out of state when his reputation in our community became too damaged to maintain his business. The whisper network among local parents ensured he couldn't rebuild his predatory patterns with another vulnerable family. Brenda reached out through Clara, sharing her own documentation of Elias's behavior with his daughter, creating a fuller picture of his pattern of targeting teenage girls. 6 months after leaving, I stood in my new bedroom at Clara's house, now truly mine rather than just a guest room. The space reflected my personality in ways my old room never could, free from the fear of Elias's invasions. My therapy sessions had decreased to bi-weekly, progress evident in my ability to sleep through the night without checking my door. Mom continued her own therapeutic work, slowly earning back small pieces of trust through consistent actions rather than words. We met monthly in public places, rebuilding a relationship on my terms. She downsized her life significantly after Elias left, learning to manage finances independently for the first time since Dad died. The private academy brochures Elias had collected became evidence in the official documentation of his abuse. Those facilities designed to imprison troubled teens had nearly become my reality. But instead, I'd found freedom through Clara's intervention and my own courage to document the truth. My phone, once a tool of surveillance and control, became normal again. I could text friends without fear of monitoring, browse the internet without dreading interrogation, exist digitally without Elias's suffocating oversight. Simple freedoms felt revolutionary after months of captivity. School friendships slowly rebuilt as Elias's poisonous influence faded. Some relationships couldn't be salvaged, the damage too deep from parents who still believed Elias's narrative about my instability. but new connections formed with people who understood survival and resilience. The flash drive containing Elias's browser history remained in Clara's safe. Potential evidence if he ever tried to return. Brenda had taught us that predators often circled back when they thought vigilance had relaxed. We remained prepared without living in fear. Balance achieved through practical precautions. My story joined the countless others of teenagers failed by systems meant to protect them. But it also joined stories of survival, of adults who eventually listened, of escape from carefully constructed traps. Elias had built my prison methodically, but I documented my way to freedom. 9 months after escape, I helped Clara redecorate the kitchen where I'd first found refuge. We painted over the beige walls with warm colors, creating a space that felt like home rather than just shelter. The physical transformation paralleled my internal rebuilding, slow, intentional, permanent. Mom's latest therapy breakthrough involved recognizing her own childhood patterns that Elias had exploited. Understanding didn't excuse her choices, but provided context for healing. Our monthly meetings had evolved to include occasional texts, small steps toward a fundamentally different relationship. The private academy Elias had chosen sent promotional materials to Mom's house for months after. Each brochure a reminder of the future he planned for me. Mom forwarded them to Clara's lawyer, adding to the evidence file that would follow Elias wherever he tried to establish new hunting grounds. My senior year began with possibilities Elias had tried to steal. College applications replaced private academy research. My improving grades opening doors he tried to close. Teachers who'd witnessed my transformation wrote recommendation letters that spoke to resilience without needing details. Elias's complete removal from our lives revealed how thoroughly he'd infected every aspect. Mom discovered financial accounts he'd hidden, debts he'd accumulated in her name, damage that would take years to repair. But she faced each challenge without retreating into denial, growth born from accepting harsh truths. The house felt different during my rare visits to collect belongings. Elias's presence lingered like smoke damage, invisible but pervasive. Mom was planning to sell once she'd stabilized financially, understanding that some spaces couldn't be reclaimed from trauma. Graduation approached with Clara as my proudest supporter. She'd become more than an aunt, more than a guardian. She was the adult who'd believed me when systems failed, who'd risked family conflict to ensure my safety. The cap and gown I'd wear represented triumph over someone who'd tried to erase my future. Brenda maintained occasional contact, her daughter now in college and thriving after years of distance from Elias. Their story provided a roadmap for my own healing, proof that survival was possible, that Elias's damage wasn't permanent. We were linked by a shared understanding of his tactics and a commitment to preventing future victims. The final therapy session before graduation focused on integration, acknowledging how the experience had shaped me without letting it define me. Elias had stolen months of my adolescence, but not my capacity for joy, trust, or growth. Those things had been buried, but not destroyed, emerging stronger through recovery. Mom attended graduation at my invitation, sitting separately from Clara, but present. Her tears seemed genuine as she watched me walk across the stage, perhaps finally understanding what she'd almost lost to maintain Elias's approval. The moment was complicated. Pride mixed with regret, distance alongside connection. That night, I lay in my bed at Clara's house, no longer checking locks or startling at footsteps. The girl researching private academies on her phone seemed like a different person, though her courage in documenting abuse had made this freedom possible. Elias was gone, his power dissolved through truth and intervention. The future stretched ahead, undefined by Elias's limitations. College acceptances arrived for programs he'd never wanted me to pursue, dreams he'd tried to suffocate with control. I chose a school several hours away, far enough for independence, but close enough for Clara's continued support. Mom helped me shop for dorm supplies, a careful reconstruction of normal parent-child activities. We navigated around triggers, both learning what felt safe. Her therapy work showed in small ways, asking permission before hugging, respecting boundaries Elias had demolished. Progress came in increments, trust rebuilt through repetition. The flash drive of evidence found its permanent home in a safety deposit box. Insurance against Elias's potential return. Brenda had taught us that predators often circled back when they thought vigilance had relaxed. We remained prepared without living in fear, balance achieved through practical precautions. My story joined the countless others of teenagers failed by systems meant to protect them. But it also joined stories of survival, of adults who eventually listened, of escape from carefully constructed traps. Elias had built my prison methodically, but I documented my way to freedom. Moving into my dorm room felt like the final step in reclaiming autonomy. Clara helped me arrange the space, both of us crying as we acknowledged how far we'd come from that desperate kitchen confrontation. The room was small, but it was mine, chosen rather than assigned by a predator's design. Mom texted photos of the empty house the day she finally moved out. She'd found a small apartment she could afford independently. The first space in years not contaminated by Elias's presence. Our parallel journeys toward independence intersected occasionally, but no longer defined each other. The girl who'd hidden torn textbook pages in her locker had evolved into someone who spoke openly about surviving family abuse, not for attention or sympathy, but because silence had nearly destroyed me. If my story helped one teenager recognize the patterns, document the abuse, find their Clara, then every moment of pain held purpose.